Disclosure.
Hey, are your ideas for global takeover falling apart? Are you losing sleep over humanity's mass awakening? Is false flag terrorism fizzling out? Global warming gone cold on you? Do you want those global warming deniers to just go away? Are all your phony economic crises being exposed? Is the price of gold defying all your attempts to fix it? Isn't killing the Gulf of Mexico and poisoning millions of people reducing the population fast enough for you? War, famine, and GM food not getting it done either? No? Well, don't give up. Get disclosure. You'll be able to unite mankind with a phony problem and enslave them with one world government and taxes. Yes, disclosure. Your one-stop shop for full spectrum dominance. But wait, there's more. Sign up for Disclosure today and you'll get problem, reaction, solution absolutely free. That's right, absolutely free. Act now to be entered into our fabulous propaganda prize draw. Disclosure! Our surveys show that 9 out of 10 world leaders prefer it. Disclosure, cleansing the minds of the unwashed masses with a tantalizing, terrifying, taxable new reality. I'm only going to say this 3 times. Disclosure! Disclosure! Aliens may or may not be real. Your home may be at risk from those possible aliens. No major credit cards accepted because there is only one currency under a one-world government. Prepare to die screaming, probably. Disclosure is compatible with Project Bluebeam. Do not employ critical thinking.
The Los Altos Drive-In Theater, once located at 2800 North Bellflower Boulevard in Long Beach, California, where I watched such classics as Raiders of the Lost Ark, Back to the Future, and, in its final hours before closing, Jurassic Park, is now a typical shopping mall, complete with the ho-hum-drum of a Papa John's Pizza and Kmart. Upon its wide release on June 11th, 1982, E.T. invaded every American city and suburb. Within 2 weeks, Reese's Pieces sales tripled. Variety's McCarthy critiqued E.T. as the best Disney film Disney never made. Mrs. Hadley would have been only a few blocks away and just as many weeks old when I participated in my own screening of the film from the front seat of the family wagon. And I can distinctly recall walking around the church parsonage in Hawthorne, California, endlessly rehearsing E.T. phone home, E.T. phone home. This is likely due to the fact that my parents documented those persistent words on cassette tape, and for years thereafter, I wore out the ribbon by rewinding and playing my performance on the very Japanese-made Panasonic that had earlier recorded it. But I wasn't the only one. Neil Diamond wrote a hit song, Heartlight, based on the film's central tropes. Michael Jackson not only purchased one of the working puppets used in the film, but in a somewhat more masterful performance than my own, can be heard crying at E.T.'s death during his own special LP-length recording. At President Reagan's request, Spielberg held a private screening in the White House. The First Lady cried during the film's third act. Then again, so did the Gipper. Spielberg told Twilight Zone magazine, "The leader of the free world could not withhold a little moisture in his eyes." He added, "I view that as a very positive sign." On the 17th of September, E.T. made an unprecedented appearance at United Nations headquarters in New York City. Twilight Zone magazine writer David Schifrin was on hand to witness the event and interview its director. He wrote, "E.T.'s United Nations debut came before a standing room only crowd of foreign dignitaries, consulate members, and UN staffers who saw the young director receive the UN's Medal of Peace, the first time the prestigious award has ever gone to a filmmaker. They then watched a special showing of Spielberg's blockbuster hit E.T. Schifrin adds, "Despite the event's formal setting, the UN's spacious trusteeship council chamber, where almost every seat bears an official placard naming a member country, the audience was completely swept up by the film. They applauded enthusiastically during the closing credits, particularly for Spielberg's name, and cheered during the more exciting scenes. The UN and ET are one and the same, Spielberg said in his acceptance speech. They both have the desire and the need to communicate, to care, and to love. This film is dedicated to all children of all ages. Further voicing approval for the UN, Spielberg concluded, the United Nations represents everything that ET stands for: love and communication. ET's arrival at the UN did nothing to massage the nerves of right-wing evangelicals. Eschatological-minded Christians had long been suspicious of the UN's potential to fulfill the prophecies of the Apostle John. By making this the case in The Late Great Planet Earth, Christian Zionist and dispensationalist author Hal Lindsey prompted an entire baby boomer generation to gaze up at the clouds for the Lord's return, while science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke had already called out the aliens' bluff, detailing them as your run-of-the-mill biblical devil, and then being so bold and perverse to glory at their destined arrival in Childhood's End, published in 1953. The books of Christian author Frank Peretti would be instrumental in cementing the alien-demon connection. The blood of American radio host and televangelist Bob Larson simply boiled over the connections he made between rock music and Satanism. His book, Satanism, The Seduction of America's Youth, persuaded countless parents that forces were influencing America's youth through ghoulish games, horror films, black metal music, and drugs, as well as occult enticements, in hopes of selling their souls to Satan. Dungeons and Dragons was criminalized in the church, and as most online reviews by a grown and apparently bitter millennial will show, Phil Phillips' book, Turmoil in the Toy Box, published in 1986, pillaged and plundered the playtime carpets of countless childhoods by convincing their parents that He-Man, G.I. Joe, Star Wars, My Little Pony, and Smurfs were laced with occult ties. I remember it well. If Turmoil in the Toy Box was a war, then I was in the trenches. It was something we didn't realize at the time, but now it looks like a low-scale version of the McCarthy-era paranoia around communism, said Peter Bebergal, author of Season of the Witch, How the Occult Saved Rock and Roll, in an interview with IO9. He further said, the devil worshippers could be anywhere. They could be your next door neighbor. They could be your child's caregiver. He furthermore added, a lot of it was having a spiritual vacuum created by the fact that the 1960s promise of the cosmic spiritual consciousness didn't really pan out. Then you had this 1960s uptick of paranormal investigations, ESP, and interest in UFOs, really climaxing with Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But the aliens never actually landed, you know? I think it led to a cynicism that led to a kind of cultural paranoia. There is no meaning. There was already an uptick in fundamentalist Christianity. The Reagan right had begun to dominate politics, and it was the beginning of a cultural war. That's when the Parents Music Resource Center started to put labels on album covers to warn against profanity or even references to the occult. It was a perfectly ripe stew for satanic panic. In a way, believing that Satan is running the world is still offering a kind of order to things, in a world that can feel very disorderly. And yet the satanic panic which once sent the baby boomer generation into a tailspin is no more. More precisely, it is but a whimper, already doomed to messy backfiling in the annals of discomforted minds. Somewhere along the way, the Christian dusted his devil-worshipping Led Zeppelin album off and returned it straightway to the turntable, callously shrugging as he did so. Despite Jimmy Page's lifelong devotion to Aleister Crowley, I can only deduce that songs like Highway to Heaven, particularly Page's clear pronunciation of Hail Satan when played backwards, means little but theatrics to the haphazard person who who deceives himself into claiming a love for the Lord while singing along. The devil's music has become family entertainment. For many, and dare I say most, the spirit is thoroughly quenched. Looking back on it all, there is a tragically missed opportunity in Christian musician Keith Green's 1977 song, "Nobody Believes in Me Anymore," which was written from Satan's perspective and played as an anthem for the satanic panic generation. Most seem to paint the Satanists with shades of Shakespeare, the double-double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble of the three witches of Macbeth, or wayward sisters, one of the most famous lines in English literature, rather than the real thing. Rumors of poisoned Halloween candy and drug-like childcare workers abounded, in part thanks to daytime television. Mention of the Kabbalist, the alchemist, or the mystics of science were altogether muted. In the end, the satanic panic crowd based much of its content on broad sweeping theatrical generalizations, chasing after wind-swept caricatures and the elongated shadows of gnats rather than real magic, the kind which saturates our very cognition through the alpha waves of television and with the potency to program, the kind of magic which sends men to the moon and, in the most delusional of indoctrination power, changes the shape of the earth. Phil Phillips is clearly a man of God. After publishing Turmoil in the Toy Box and its follow-up Saturday Morning Mind Control, authoring 15 books in total and selling 1.3 million copies, and succumbing to a stool and dunce cap of ridicule, he has become the president of God Loves Kids, a missions organization caring for almost 4,000 children and which currently builds orphanages in Nepal. As a Christian, Phillips is the real deal. He came to warn us. Most didn't listen. The thing is, much like the satanic panic movement which prompted him to action, many of his ideas seem ill-considered. For example, when warning parents of the occult's almost omnipresence in E.T., he seems to get some details wrong in the investigation, such as the children playing Dungeons and Dragons in the opening scene, which makes me wonder if he actually saw the movie to begin with. And according to Phillips, E.T., and he quotes, tells Elliott that he'll always be with him in his heart. For someone playing the part of town squire, he tragically mismanages an important detail, assuming he took the time to see the movie at all. E.T. doesn't tell Elliott he'll be with him in his heart. What E.T. actually accomplishes to get away with is far more frightening, and precisely why the satanic panic crowd seem to be grasping at straws, rather than the truth behind their spiritual discretion. The movement perished for lack of knowledge. With a glowing fingertip, E.T. points to the boy's forehead and assures him, "I'll be right here." By turning our attention to Elliott's third eye, E.T. has just given himself away. He is not truly a cosmic traveler. He is as old as the angels, which, according to Enoch, conspired to take human wives on Mount Hermon. With his long, glowing fingers reaching out like the hand of God in Michelangelo's famous painting, an image used for the film's promotion and which seemingly went unchallenged by the church, E.T. is Elliott's astral guide. Even Neil Diamond seemed to get the memo. With Heartlight, he wrote, "Turn on your heartlight in the middle of a young boy's dream. Don't wake me up too soon. Gonna take a ride across the moon, you and me." Further generalizations and unsubstantiated rumors only make Phillips' claims ill-considered when he reports a recent, and he quotes, conversation with one screenwriter of E.T., a man deeply troubled at his involvement with the movie. He told me about the visual subliminals the screenwriters wove into the movie, many of which were specifically designed to enhance the reputation of and change the nation's thinking about the homosexual community. This is as far as Phillips dares to go, perhaps because he did not actually have the capacity to recognize subliminal homosexuality while keeping on the lookout for them. He could have mentioned the shed where Elliott first meets E.T., or the Reese's, which he cleverly coaxed him to his bedroom with, or the woman's clothing which Gertie dresses him in, or the fact that E.T. was never conclusively identified as male or female. This is important. In fact, Spielberg confessed to writing E.T. as an asexual creature, which only complicates the film's budding pubescent sexuality. Consider E.T. getting drunk with an indiscriminate portion of beer. Telepathically, which is an occult practice by the way, Elliott also succumbs to drunkenness at school. When E.T. watches John Wayne kiss Maureen O'Hara in a televised broadcast of John Ford's The Quiet Man, we are left to ponder whether E.T. was sexually stimulated by Wayne or O'Hara. And when it comes to subliminal messaging, let's not overlook the rainbow, which clearly breaks God's own laws of natural science to paint a starry sky at E.T.'s departing. One thing is certain. Those who refused to acknowledge the work of Satan in the world were immediately capable of critiquing the film's underbelly to America, and with remarkable acuteness. Why did the Satanic Panic crowd struggle to do so? As the 1980s dawned, conservative familialism was maintained under the protection of patriarchal culture and sought to vilify unconventional families, such as gays and lesbians, as well as single parents. It actually mirrored the Satanic Panic with its widespread fear that a battle of good versus evil was raging just below the surface of American culture, in the face of soaring divorce rates, which more than doubled between 1970 and 1980, and widespread invocations to sustain marriages at all cost. E.T. simply spun that around and gave us a look at the alternative. Actually, that alternative brought America to tears. Whatever the outcome of Elliott's blossoming sexuality may prove to be, one thing remained certain. His father had run off to Mexico with another woman, and his mother was on the verge of emotional collapse. And yet, the child of divorce could not only survive, but also thrive. In short, the family would get along just fine. After its premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, film critic Pauline Kael wrote in The New Yorker, "It is bathed in warmth and seems to clear all the bad thoughts out of your head." Film critic Marina Hung maintained that the endearing appeal of E.T. inheres in the dissolution of the nuclear heterosexual family over the later half of the 20th century and the concomitant threat posed by this disintegration to many believers in the nuclear heterosexual family's powerful and presumably positive effect on child development. It is an odd little story between an alien and a child, wrote Thomas of The Guardian, which clears those bad thoughts. In the E.T. storybook, I picked it up in a thrift store, based in part on Melissa Matheson's screenplay and released with the movie's premiere, author William Kotzwinkle describes the alienated alien with all the zig and zag lines of a modern Renaissance man, the artist, inventor, healer. His race is described with, and he quotes, misshapen heads, their drooping arms and roly-poly sawed-off torsos. One might mistake him for a goblin with his enormous bulbous eyes and webbed feet coming almost directly out of his low-hanging belly and his long hands trailing along ape fashion behind it. What particularly strikes my interest is the mystical woods, still untouched by the bulldozer, and which rises high above Elliott's suburban home, where we first meet him. Bunched together among the flora, one might mistake them for little old elves caring for their misty moonlit gardens, which would, according to Kotzwinkle, make one think of Elfland, and the tenderness they showed the plants might add to this impression. E.T. and his crew of botanists were very old, for they had collected everything that grew or had grown on Earth throughout its existence, including what only remains now in fossil form, imprinted in coal. The botanist has had millions of years' experience on Earth. This Cotswinkle assures us. E.T. is the perfect description of the Watchers who, for thousands of years, have invigorated the mystery religion and cultivated the wisdom as well as sciences of Eastern and Western civilization. Cotswinkle adds, he loved Earth, especially its plant life, but he liked humanity too, and always, when his heart light glowed, he wanted to teach them, guide them, give them the stored intelligence of millions of years. Space itself is the grand illusion. Being first and foremost a botanist, we find E.T.'s meaning in the pagan religion from which he originated from, animism and pantheism. The little garden gnome not only watched over the physical preservation of Earth's vegetation, but their souls. Wandering off the fire road into Elliott's backyard, a path which carried him down like a god from the mountain, Cotswinkle further elaborates on his extraordinary gifting. He writes, something in the yard was sending soft signals. He turned and saw the vegetable garden. He crept towards it, embraced an artichoke, and asked the vegetables what he should do. Their advice, to go and look in the kitchen window, was not welcome. The artichoke insisted, grunting softly, and the extraterrestrial crept off obediently. A little later, when the pizza delivery person arrives, E.T. panics. There's nothing to fear, said a tomato plant. It's only the pizza wagon. When E.T. dove into the shed to protect himself, he found tools, particularly a dipping fork with which to defend himself. Don't stab yourself in the foot, said a little potted ivy. E.T. could feel the life of the orange diminish as it was plucked from a tree. Like a true fairy of theosophy, E.T.'s spirit seemed interlocked with a common houseplant. When E.T. died, so did the geranium. There is another ingredient to E.T.'s role as a watcher of old. He was conjured. Elliott's mother, Mary, only recently divorced and in dire need of excitement in her life, we are told by Cotswinkle, looked strangely upon her two sons and their friends as they played Dungeons and Dragons with their six-sided cube in her kitchen, which is described as a rubble of a ruined city of crush bottles, potato chip bags, books, papers, calculators. She tries to make sense of their talk. One voice says, so you get to the edge of the forest, but you make a truly stupid mistake, so I'm calling in the wandering monsters. And then another, can I get wandering monsters called out for just befriending a goblin? Steve's dungeon master. That would be her son Michael. He's got absolute power. Absolute power, Mary sighs, but she couldn't even get them to dry a dish. And then Elliott. She recognizes the voice of her second-born. He shouts, I run down the road. They're after me. Just when they're about to get me and they're really mad, I throw down my portable hole. I climb in and pull the lid closed. Presto, disappeared into thin air. Portable hole? If only I had one to disappear into, Mary thought. What she doesn't realize, what none of them do, is that an actual demon is being conjured through the ritual. In fact, Elliott has rather arrogantly laid out a precise plan of action for his astral guide in the days to come. Within moments, the two will meet under the light of a waxing moon, like something from Aleister Crowley's Moonchild. We should recognize some semiotics at play. It is rather Kabbalistic in nature, because the letters E and T begin and end with the protagonist, Elliott, therefore foreshadowing the mystical connection that the two will share. That said, the feminine moon, with her wealth of esoteric potency, is a major player in the unfolding drama, despite not being listed in the closing credits. E.T. and Elliott's soaring flight on a bicycle made for two will bypass the light of the moon at its fullest. This will occur on Halloween night, which is also the ancient druidic festival of Samhain, a dreadfully important moment in the pagan and occult ritual calendar. It is the night when the gates and doors to the other world are opened, and the spirits of the dead enter our realm. It is also the very night in which E.T. sets up his computer to call upon them. This is precisely the significance of the shadow government scientist played by real-life Marxist Peter Coyote, but whom we only know as Keys. For most of the movie, we never see Coyote's face, only the keys jingling from his belt. On the esoteric level, his flashlight reminds us of the hidden knowledge which pierces the darkness. However, we need also reference the Key of Solomon, an occultist text of the Italian Renaissance, typical of Renaissance occult science, which is inaccurately ascribed to King Solomon but deals with conjurations, invocations, and curses to summon and constrain spirits of the dead and demons in order to compel them to do the operator's will. Aleister Crowley translated one version of it. With E.T., the scientists of the shadow government are none other than wizards attempting to summon a botanical gnome, not spacemen. Considering all this and what we know of Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, and Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which created the American space program, the fact that government esoterics arrived to apprehend E.T. dressed as NASA astronauts lends further credence to this movie representing one massive ceremony. Imagery stylized after a Kubrick movie seems to fill every frame. Remember when an intoxicated E.T. watches John Wayne kiss Maureen O'Hara on the television? While this transpires, we cut to Elliott's classroom, where 3 distinct posters depict Voyager, Jupiter, and Io. Voyager was the mission that sent probes to Jupiter and Saturn in the late 1970s, all thanks to Jet Propulsion Laboratory. In Magia Sexualis, author Hugh Urban described Crowley's use of sex magic as a powerful means to shatter the limited rational mind and finite human ego. He writes, however, the ultimate goal that Crowley sought through his sexual magic went far beyond the mundane desire for material wealth or mortal power. In his most exalted moments, Crowley believed that he could achieve a supreme spiritual power, the power to conceive a divine child, a godlike being who would transcend the moral failings of the body born of a mere woman. This goal of creating a divine fetus, Crowley suggests, lies at the heart of many esoteric traditions, from ancient Mesopotamia to India to the Arab world. This is the great idea of magicians in all times, to obtain a messiah by some adaptation of the sexual process. In Assyria, they tried incest. Greeks and Syrians, mostly bestiality. The Mohammedans tried homosexuality. Medieval philosophers tried to produce one by making chemical experiments with semen. But the root idea is that any form of procreation other than normal is likely to produce results of a magical character. Sex magic, particularly in its transgressive, non-reproductive forms, can thus unleash the supreme creative power, the power to create not an ordinary fetus, but a magical child of messianic potential. Even the movie itself was filmed in a ceremonious fashion. If one watches the DVD commentary, Drew Barrymore reminisces that E.T. was like a guardian angel for them, insisting that he was almost real. We can surmise that E.T. is a type of reptilian creature, which is best hinted at when he telepathically commands Elliott to free the frogs moment after screenwriter Melissa Matheson's husband, Harrison Ford, tells his class the frogs won't feel a thing. E.T. has kundalini energy about him, a serpent presence, or what the occultists would gladly call the light bearer. E.T. fills each shoe nicely. Steven Spielberg once told The Best of Starlog, there was a severe reverence on the set shown by everybody, Even the guys who swept the floors toward E.T. severe reverence. The kids believed in E.T. the way we believe in Santa Claus, or should believe in Santa Claus. Everybody had such a belief in E.T. as a living, breathing organism that no one would dare go up to him and make fun of his appearance or make fun of his awkwardness. He really did seem to have a life of his own. Elliott, your friend is a rare and valuable creature, Keyes tells Elliott in Cotswinkle's storybook. We want to know him. If we can get to know him, we can learn so many things about the universe and about life. Keyes' fictional words line up with Spielberg's. He told Twilight Zone magazine, "I think that in the presence of an extraterrestrial, the United States government, or any government of the world, would want knowledge, not conflict or hostility. I believe that we will solve all our own problems, but it would be nice to know that there's somebody up there who likes us. It helps." Dare I call E.T. satanic? But I will. I must. There is hardly a worse cause for mockery than to call anything for what it is. To call rock music satanic in a serious way, or to accuse Hollywood of the same falsehood, is cause for a burlesque rebuttal. That is because hardly anyone, and I include much of the satanic panic generation in this, seems to grasp the implication of Jesus' pacifism when he answered in John 18:36, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence." The devil had already taken Jesus to an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, as Matthew records. And he, being the devil, said to him, Jesus, "All these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Matthew 4:8-9. Jesus did not dispute the devil. It is indeed an eye-opening moment to shed the pounds of cognitive dissonance and come to the awareness that Satan fully manages and operates the kingdoms of this world. All of them. I am not being cavalier. I certainly didn't stumble upon this realization, or rather, the scales which had likely been placed over my eyes the very year I was born were not shed until I discovered what the Bible said, and what's more, believed what the Bible declares as true regarding the shape of the earth. Surely, we are being lied to by everyone. Every kingdom, including North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, Israel, and our very own, the United States of America, are operated and managed by Satan. The Bible does not disagree. Jesus did not tell Satan, "Oh yes, but about 1700 years from now, there will be this one country across the ocean. Oh, they're going to be my people. They're going to love me. You can't have them, Satan." NASA is most certainly operated and managed by Satan. It exists as an entity of the executive branch of government. But then let us not forget the Democrats and the Republicans. Hollywood is Satan's dominion. Nashville is Satan's dominion. Wall Street is Satan's dominion. The Boy Scouts of America probably is too. There are 192 nations currently under the UN banner by my count. They also are operated and managed by Satan, every one of them. Our Lord Jesus wouldn't bend a knee for a single claim to fame from any of them. He did not defeat Satan by running for government. He crushed his head on the cross, and by his blood, he has snatched us away from the kingdom of darkness. His kingdom is not of this world, yet. So why must ours? Where is the outrage? Where is the, dare I say it, satanic panic? Get out of Babylon. Spielberg's highest ambition for the movie, he told TZ, "I would hope the film would encourage interest from off the planet to come visit us someday. That would be nice and very rewarding." But knowing what we do of the little garden gnome and his kind, we're already being tended to. He touched Elliott's forehead, writes Kotzwinkle. I'll be right here, he said, fingertip glowing. The last line of Kotzwinkle's narrative reads, he went into the misty light with his geranium.
Last weekend, Netflix released Season 2 of their hit series, Stranger Things, just in time for Halloween. The show, of course, was an instant cult classic, creating millions of fans last year with its clever combination of an original sci-fi/horror plotline, with engaging and well-developed characters, and a heavy dose of 80s nostalgia. But just how original are the concepts and themes of this mega-hit series? How much of it all is actually limited to the realm of science fiction and fantasy in the first place? The channel ODD TV made an excellent video in 2016 explaining how the facility featured in Stranger Things, where the children were experimented on using trauma-based mind control techniques and sensory deprivation chambers, is a surprisingly accurate depiction of what really did occur under the Montauk Project.
The Montauk Project. The Montauk Project was a series of secret United States government projects conducted at Camp Hero and/or Montauk Air Force Station on Montauk, Long Island. It was secretly developing a powerful psychological war weapon. The Montauk Project is a continuation of the controversial Philadelphia experiment, which took place around October 28, 1943. A report was prepared and presented to Congress and was soundly rejected as far too dangerous. So a proposal was made directly to the Department of Defense promising a powerful new weapon that can drive an enemy insane, inducing the symptoms of schizophrenia at the touch of a button. Without congressional approval, the project would have to be top secret and secretly funded. The Department of Defense approved. The U.S. Air Force had a decommissioned base at Montauk, New York, not far from Brookhaven, which had a complete SAGE radar installation. This site was large and remote, and water access would allow equipment to be moved in and out undetected.
One thing they loved to do was drown you, hold you underwater to the point where you were about to give up.
They wanted to split the mind. They wanted to shatter the mind. That they would program each individual piece for something else.
But what was the intention on the beatings and the drownings? That must have...
That was to shatter the mind even further.
So they can manipulate it?
Yes, they can manipulate it.
Breaking the psyche of the person to install programming, to fracture the mind pattern, is to make you uncomfortable. Because when you're, first you're cold, then you're hot, then you're cold, and the mind doesn't know what to expect, and after a while it fractures. Okay, when you take a personality and you fragment it into pieces, they take one of the pieces and then they develop it into a sub-personality or a related personality, which is a little different than the core personality, and then they provide a code that triggers that personality to come forward and take control of the body. There were so many different types of rituals that involved astral entities, but one of them was to create the child as a vessel so that the entity could enter the body of the child and animate it, and then those participating in the ritual would achieve the energy of that entity that was occupying the body. There would be a chemical type of smell. They would put things in my arms, in my legs, in my genitals, in my head, and then I would hear input, voices over and over and over again, and then there'd be like this swirl. I would see this swirling vortex over my visual perception.
Researcher William Ramsey did a short video pointing out some of the symbolism there relating to occult numerology and connections to the West Memphis Three and Damien Eccles, who is a follower of the Crowleyan religion.
11. What's that mean? What's it mean?
We find out later that her last name is Ives, I-V-E-S, which really means nothing until you find out another of the main characters' name is Byers, the same last name as one of the victims in the West Memphis 3 murders in Arkansas. In 1987, teenagers Kevin Ives and Don Henry were found dead on a railroad track in the forest of Arkansas. Initially, the death of Ives and his friend was ruled accidental, but a few months later, the ruling was changed to probable homicide. The creators of the show seem to use the same type of imagery from the West Memphis 3 murders. Winona Ryder stars as the mother of the missing child. She was also a supporter of the West Memphis 3. Here she is with Los Angeles supporters. This is Winona Ryder with Dan Stidham, the defense attorney who represented Jesse Misskelley.
I got it! Does the 7 count? Was the 7? Did Mike see it? Then it doesn't count.
I don't know.
Gonz Shimura of the Face Like the Sun channel did a fantastic job delving into a lot of the spiritual and occult symbolism found in the series, as well as talking about many of the implications the story has regarding things like interdimensional contact between our plane of existence and the demonic realm.
Quote, I believe this show is popular at a surface level because of its many 80s pop culture references and a glimpse into what life was like as a preteen kid before the world of the internet, right? It's just totally different, and it appeals to that nostalgia that I've said before. People like us born in the 80s, we're the last generation to live before the world of the internet, which goes to show how huge the internet is in terms of its vehicle to promote certain concepts and ideas like it does here on Stranger Things. But the show's richness in the plot and the characters and the outright references to fringe subject matters really gives Stranger Things a depth that very few shows have achieved. But even behind all that richness and great plot and all that stuff is this really deep well of occult symbolism throughout the show, connections to pagan mythologies and deities, to the obvious references to Spielberg and the 80s style cinema, which beyond just a nostalgia thing, I think is an homage to the people in the era who really did define how to captivate an audience with a story that delivers occulted realities, to the revealing of the kinds of outcomes that resulted from mind control experiments with children like MK Ultra. It appeals to the idea of human psychology and imagination in connection to the unseen world as it bleeds into our world. It touches on the quantum anomalies that create portals and gateways into this unseen underworld. The obvious tip to the realities of electromagnetism having a huge part of this construct of how these portals and dimensions work with each other, and even the messianic symbolism laid right in front of us with one of the most important characters of the show, 11, which they call El, again, reference to God in Hebrew, or divine being in Hebrew, who recalls of the torturous experiments conducted on her in the MK Ultra program and defeats the Demigorgon, or this demonic entity in the show, by sacrificing herself. And so the show is jam-packed with these references, and there's no way I'm going to be able to touch on every single one of those references. It's just too rich. And I don't know if all of the references here were intentional or not, but it definitely has struck a chord with a lot of people, and it's become a phenomenon, which in itself says something about where we are in society. Now, on this YouTube channel, we've talked a lot about the bleed through between the unseen world and this world, you know, the spiritual dimension with this physical dimension, and, you know, how it's been happening and how the effects have been documented in many different ways, from paranormal events to now digital events, and the crossover there with a lot of the devices now that capture disembodied voices and things like that, and the many videos and photos we've seen of alleged paranormal events, some of it fake, some of it unexplained. There is a undergirding reality to this idea of openings into the other side or the other world, what the show Stranger Things calls the upside down. And it's a theme that's been shown to us throughout media. And it comes in the form of this black darkness, this deep, and really this black goo. Now, I made 2 short videos on black goo, and there are others like Nicholson 1968 who have done great videos that talk about the black goo. But there's definitely this connection to technology and this black goo. We see it in the symbolism in the Lady Gaga stuff, who obviously promotes this virtual reality. KJ mentioned, and I had the exact same thought when I was watching it, the scene from Under the Skin, where they're in this dimension of black glass that becomes goo, this substance. And if you have the eyes to see it, it's really everywhere. You see it all over the place. And this idea of a screen and this connection to technology is deeper than I think people realize. Is there a connection with all this deliberately to the monolith that was shown in Space Odyssey 2001? Is that the beginning of this opening of a portal, or this ascension, this advancement, this occult promise that is actually a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, which leads to God's judgment and the restoration of all creation? Are we seeing these elements being presented to us for a reason? And I think we have to step back and take a look at where we're at here, because the internet, which Netflix is built on the internet, right? Stranger Things is a show that's being exclusively delivered on the internet. Really, the internet is an opening into alternative realities. And our devices are just windows into all these different realms. Some of them real and, edited and presented to you. Some of them not real, the world of fantasy or virtual reality or different stories, TV shows, science fiction. We've become a society that conceptually interacts with this non-corporal, metaphysical side of life, the realm of imagination. We call it data or information that's gathered and presented in this medium, but that's the whole point. These ideas, these realms, these virtual worlds require a physical medium to access it. And I think the all-seeing eye symbolism has been one that's represented throughout the occult world, a representation of a window into this unseen world, or this occult underworld, the realm of the imagination that's actually bleeding into our world. And that commentary is really interesting because I believe this is a reality. I believe there is something to human consciousness and human imagination that has a direct relationship with the spiritual world and directly affects our physical world.
It is indeed extremely fascinating to look back on it all, and that section of Gonza's video specifically, and to reflect on that in light of much of the research I've been doing on my own channel involving enclosed cosmology, and the idea of overlapping spiritual dimensions, and the quantum physics arena and its relationship to occult concepts and ideology. But speaking of occult ideology, that's really the reason I felt led to chime in on this topic now with Season 2, especially in light of another Halloween and how all this ties together as yet another piece of the massive tapestry of mainstream propaganda that is, without question, pushing this Luciferian occult ideology in rather obvious ways, if only you're willing to admit it. While many people out there have been pointing out the facts surrounding the reality of things like the MKUltra programs and the connections to Project Paperclip and Montauk and so many of the black budget programs that have gone on and are still going on, which involve the weaponization and industrialization of ancient occult practices, witchcraft, and satanic ritual abuse, the one aspect that's probably not emphasized nearly enough within this peculiar circle of truther media evaluation is the simple underlying message pervading the entire series in both seasons, and probably all that might come in the future. And it's this message of how the protagonists face off against this mysterious and terrifying combination of covert government agendas and these nightmarish supernatural entities from some dark dimension. The thematic visuals that dominated the trailers and the artwork for the Series 2 really encapsulates it all perfectly. The four boys of this group of friends finally reunited after Will was missing for pretty much the entirety of Season 1. They get dressed up for Halloween as the Ghostbusters. And this is more than just more 80s nostalgia. This is basically the epitome of the whole show. And it's actually kind of a perfect way of stopping and reflecting on the fact that, in many ways, the 1980s, which is a decade that I lived through as a child myself, it was a time when this theme of the supernatural and horror, aliens, poltergeists, all of it just really exploded in movies and pop culture, along with, there was always the average Joe heroes who were always so common in the 80s material, who would rise up to stand against, whatever out-of-this-world threat was coming at them. Both Series 1 and 2 of Stranger Things utilizes the game Dungeons & Dragons as a sort of plot device through which the boys use various characters and elements from the quote fantasy game to help explain various features and phenomenon they're encountering in the real world. Yet, ironically, this is precisely what Dungeons & Dragons was designed to do in the real world, as it introduces a wide variety of concepts to the players that are straight out of the arena of witchcraft and the occult. And what's more, this is also exactly what all those movies from the 80s like Ghostbusters, Gremlins, Aliens, E.T., It, The Shining, so on and so forth, that's what they were all doing as well. And that's what Stranger Things is continuing to do, right now. The entire horror movie genre is itself a form of trauma-based mind control, being disseminated to the public at large. The thousands of poor innocent children who were, and still are undoubtedly, victims of satanic ritual abuse and various Montauk-related experiments over the years, they had no choice in the matter. Yet millions upon millions of people out there are now willingly exposing themselves to horrific imagery, violence, rape, paranormal apparitions, and monsters, and all the rest, all in the name of entertainment. So people now actually pay to be subjected to, quote, low-level forms of trauma, ostensibly for the alleged cathartic effect. Cathartic in the sense that it's the whole notion of watching something in order to try and, not be scared by it, to see if you can endure the carnage or the suspense or whatever, and, in short, to become desensitized. Season 2 of Stranger Things adds the introduction of another survivor from the facility named Kali, which is yet more obvious symbolism, especially when you place that alongside the name El for 11, since both those names are associated with the names of deities. And Kali teaches El to use her power more effectively, to control and channel her inner turmoil and emotional pain from the trauma and abuse, and use it to her advantage. So there are several layers of messaging going on there. On a more generic level, it's the message of, emotional healing and personal growth essentially being a self-guided and self-accomplished process. Dealing with the past, painful memories, relational hurts, internal psychological and developmental obstacles, all this, overcoming that by way of mastering those internal issues on your own, maybe with someone else's help, but something that you piece back together yourself without the need for things like forgiveness or redemption from a higher power. In short, it's the message that you don't need some external god to experience healing and wholeness in your life. At the same time, there's also the very pronounced message of glorifying the occult powers that Elle received as a result of her time spent in the horrors of the secret program. So even though the process by which she was enhanced in that way was evil, the powers themselves are not considered evil, they just can be used against evil, and that's the real key. Her powers are actually ultimately portrayed as the only thing that's capable of saving herself, saving her friends, and even the town as a whole from the interdimensional demonic threat. That's extremely, extremely important, because this is where the deceptive nature of the message is at its most subtle and yet most significant. not surprisingly, it's really the same message, the same sort of plot that we who grew up in those nostalgic 80s, we saw over and over and over again. And now we see them being constantly rehashed and re-released for the younger generations, not just in the throwbacks and culture nods of Stranger Things, but even in things like the new Ghostbusters movie with the female cast. And they just did a remake of Stephen King's It, where, just like in The Goonies and Stand By Me and the E.T. and all those motifs, the group of nerdy kids bands together and faces the danger together as a team. And so, in this familiar Spielberg-esque treatment of magic and sci-fi that so many of us grew up with, it's really the same thing over and over again. It's the same with Lucas and Star Wars, which, coincidentally, is still going stronger than ever, still glamorizing the same telekinetic powers of the Force that we see Elle use in Stranger Things. The craziest thing about the Netflix series to me is how it blatantly portrays the crossover of concepts from magic and witchcraft, as pulled from the D&D references, into the quote scientific manifestations of those same creatures and dimensions in the real world. And in that way, it's like the perfect snapshot. It's a very helpful analogy, I'd say, not just for the rampant expansion of such occult propaganda in the 80s, but really the entire 20th century as a whole could be understood in that way. It really would not be stepping out of bounds to go so far as to say that this is essentially the entire purpose of science fiction across the board. What it boils down to is the introduction and normalization of concepts and themes and ideologies to the public at large that, for most of human history, were limited to the pages of rare Necronomicons and closely guarded Kabbalistic texts and outlawed scrolls full of spells and invocations and rituals. One of the most ubiquitous tenets of occult thinking throughout all of history has been the belief that the spiritual realms are inhabited by both good and evil entities, and all sorts of species and races and such, and that it is within the capability of the adept, of the sorcerer, if you will, to not only discern for themselves which of those entities are good and which are evil, but to eventually be able to overpower and defeat the evil entities, if they embrace and learn to utilize the mysterious forces and rules of our magical interdimensional reality. And this is what every piece of propaganda coming from Hollywood has been pushing our entire lives. And almost without exception, the evil entities, be they presented as spirits or demons or aliens or monsters or whatever, they always wear their evil on their sleeve. They're always just super obvious in their destructive intentions. Whereas the entities who want to teach us how to develop our powers to achieve our full potential are always the good guys, the helpers, the benevolent ones. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if in Stranger Things Season 3 or somewhere down the line they perhaps introduce some new creature, some new benevolent entity from somewhere on the other side. Perhaps some other dimension being threatened as well. I mean, if there's the upside down, maybe they'll come up with the inside out or I don't know. But maybe they'll have some entity that'll come and start to teach all the kids how to use their psychic powers and not just Elle. Who knows? But all in all, the strangest thing about Stranger Things isn't just the fact that it reflects so many topics and themes that are a part of real conspiracies involving secret government projects and interdimensional entities and the development of things like psychic powers and dimensional portals and all the rest. It's the fact that even the show, Stranger Things, is itself actually a part of that grand conspiracy. That, quote, ancient work, the Mystery Babylon agenda, far more than even most conspiracy researchers even realize.
going to go back to Jack Nicholson. And again, this is the scene from The Shining. This is a picture of the July 4th ball. But, and also Jack Nicholson is doing the as above, so below, Baphomet. Okay? Now, we also remember in this scene, there's a gentleman here. And he is blowing a party favor that is associated with New Year's Eve and not 4th of July. So, as above, so below. They're linking 4th of July to New Year's Eve, all in this one photo. And of course, we saw an I Pet Goat, where they also had a skeleton with a party favor, but yet 4th of July was called out through the daisy on his hat that was missing 4 petals and other elements in that scene. So they, again, it was as above, so below. It mixed 4th of July with New Year's Eve. Things are not always what they seem in the Upside Down. This is the Mandela effect taken to an entirely new level. Something stranger than you can ever imagine is happening on Stranger Things. 34 is 17 and 17, and there are 17 people on the panel. 17 alphanumerically is the letter Q. And you see that the apple in the Upside Down forms a Q, and this was the ball drop in the 1984-85 New Year's Eve. Except in the Upside Down, this is Independence Day. We covered this all the way back in 2014 when we noticed that in I Pet Goat 2 they were mixing Independence Day and New Year's Eve together and flip-flopping them. Here's the clip. Haiti's Independence Day is our New Year's Eve. Who you saw was Baron Samedi, the voodoo god of Haiti, and he is blowing a New Year's Eve party favor on July 4th, just like this image from the film The Shining. Independence Day 1776 is 888 plus 888 equals 1776. And now we know what the Upside Down really is. And look at this part. During the New Year's Eve celebration of 1984-85, there was a Save the Children symbol just below the apple. The Big Apple is falling, and here we are, years later. Have they saved the children in New York? No, they have not. In fact, they've done just the opposite. But there's much more to this Save the Children Foundation than meets the eye.
from fake vaccines to sexually inappropriate conduct, and the list goes on. Read with me. In 2011, a fake vaccination program by the CIA was uncovered. It then emerged that Dr. Shaquille Afridi, the person organizing the CIA's vaccinations, had claimed that he was a Save the Children employee. In May 2012, Save the Children's country director for Pakistan, David Wright, revealed that the organization's work had been badly disrupted ever since Afridi had made this claim, with medicines held up for long periods at airports, staff unable to get visas, and so forth. Wright was also charged the CIA had breached the international humanitarian law and risked the safety of aid groups worldwide. Later that year, Pakistan asked them to leave the country, the Save the Children Foundation. So you see, there is much more to these vaccine programs than meets the eye, and the CIA was involved in this quote-unquote vaccination program. This sparked deadly attacks that they then blamed on terrorism, and Obama was notified of this, that they were using this as a cover for CIA activities. Tony Blair was awarded the Save the Children's Global Legacy Award for leadership, and it was protested as morally reprehensible and jeopardized the organization's credibility. I wonder why. And the executive Brendan Cox quits after complaints of inappropriate behavior. In the world of the upside down, nothing is as it seems. Take care and be safe, you guys.